Good morning. Hello. Oh, goodness me. I missed you too. Thank you. It's just so good to be back home. I'm booming like crazy. Maybe that's my heart expressing itself. It really is delightful to be back. And if you're visiting with us, I'll catch you up to speed. I've been away for 3 months. And, I'm filled up with gratitude for having the privilege of being able to do that, especially for our staff and for our board of trustees and for our practitioners, but importantly for you, the congregation. I've been checking in, watching those great guest speakers, and things are going so well, I started to get a little worried. Indignant. Couldn't they fall to pieces? No, I'm thrilled to be here. So what have I been up to since April? Well, some of you will know that first of all, I got married, and that was wonderful. Yes. And Kevin and I have been diligently writing hundreds of thank you notes. What a gratitude practice that is. And if we missed you for some reason, just come and tell me, and I'll thank you in person, because we tried our best to cover all our bases. And then we went to Spain for our honeymoon. Wow. Yeah, Spain will never be the same. Was terrific, We even did some cycling there. And I read some books. I'm going to tell you about one of the books that I've read, because it's really been working. I'll tell you about that a little bit later on. And I went to Oregon to visit my in-laws, new family. That's new. Interesting. And of course, I cycled from San Francisco to Los Angeles, 545 miles, with our Center for Spiritual Living cycle team. And do you know that all the 2,000 or more cyclists that were with us, we raised over $15 million. Yeah. And that goes to AIDS education and treatment, both in San Francisco and Los Angeles. And I heard that over 60% of the fund raised came from Northern California. And so I take some pride in that. Let's see. And by the way, we're gonna put together a slideshow and a presentation about that incredible ride, so we can share that with you, because so many of you sponsored us and made it possible. And one of our cyclists did get into an accident. She's fine, but what happened was just 17 miles away from the end, a car door opened and she hit the car door and went flying over and broke her collarbone. But the interesting thing, when they got her to the emergency room, there wasn't a scratch, a grate, a graze, a bruise, a bump. It's almost as if something picked her up and said, I can't do anything about the collarbone, but at least let me put you down lightly. And do you know, she said that it's not the sort of thing that a person would choose to go through, but looking back at it, she said, I wouldn't change a thing, because it ushered into my life so many healing opportunities. Isn't that something? And you'll hear more about that when we have our presentation. We just have to find a time on the calendar. Probably we'll choose a Wednesday evening, like maybe in October, and we'll get up and tell you about the terrific things that happened on that ride. And I do want to talk about that AIDS life cycle experience, the 7 days of riding across California, because my topic today is prejudice and sin, or the way I like to say it, the error of prejudice, the mistake of prejudice. It's relevant because this year on the AIDS life cycle, we experienced an increase in prejudice and hostility towards the bicyclists. Yeah, sad to say. Objects were thrown at the cyclists. Yeah. I hear some even had pepper spray sprayed in their direction. And of course, hateful words were shouted at the cyclists. I can't say it on the air, but the F word that represents gay people. Which is curious, because a large percentage of the cyclists are not gay. But that's what prejudice means. That's when I make up my mind about you, about someone, before they even have a chance to be who they are. In other words, I'm going to judge you negatively in advance. Now, every night on the ride, we kind of have camp. We're all tired, and the camp director gets up and tells stories. And one night, she told the story of one of our super fast riders. Because, some of the riders are really athletic, and they get up early in the morning, and they zoom out there, and they're ahead of everybody else. And this one rider, he was out in the middle of California nowhere, and this white Mercedes comes up alongside him, and the back passenger window rolls down, and a hand comes out and flips him off, yells out the F word, and keeps on going. And, he, as many of us do, accepted it and carried on cycling, except that a little later on, and now this is early in the morning and out in the middle of nowhere, he spots in his rear view mirror on the bicycle the same white Mercedes pulling up slowly behind him. And a voice shouts out, "Please pull over." And he panicked a little bit, but he knew to get off his bike and put the bike between him and whoever was going to come out of the car. And a woman got out of the car, and the first thing she did was go to the back passenger door and open it and pulled her young teenage daughter out and marched her over and said, "My daughter has something to tell you." And the teenage was mortified. And she apologized, and the mother said, "I'm horrified because I don't know where she could have learned that." Well, where do we learn to have the prejudices that we have? Well, some of you are young enough to have seen South Pacific. It's the 1949 Broadway hit, which is a commentary on intercultural society, and in it, if you saw it, you'll remember there is a song that addresses it. The lyrics go like this: "You've got to be taught to hate and fear. You've got to be taught from year to year. It's got to be drummed into your dear little ear. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be taught to be afraid of people whose eyes are oddly made and people whose skin is a different shade. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be taught before it's too late, before you're 6 or 7 or 8, to hate all the people your relatives hate. You've got to be carefully taught." Wow. I admit that after hearing about the aggression towards riders on the ride, that I felt myself being a little more self-conscious than I typically am. I was on edge, at the airport, at the car rental place after the ride. There's a conversation running in my head, I wonder if they can tell we're gay. I wonder if they resent having to serve us. I wonder if they privately want to flip us off or do harm to us, even worse. And Kevin's always wanting to hold hands. I'm like, can you chill out? Somebody could see. I watched the video from last week, Reverend Abigail's presentation, in which she talked about that social study that is mentioned in chapter 1 of our book of the month, Gracism, and it's so good that I want to read to you the short paragraphs that describe the experiment. Maybe you have heard of the social experiment in which 10 people were to interview at a company. Before they went to the office for the interview, a red dot was painted on one cheek of each interviewee. Each interviewee was to go into the office and sit across the desk from the interviewer. After each interview, the interviewee was debriefed. Each of the 10 interviewees stated that the interviewer kept staring at the dot on his or her cheek. Here's the kicker. Out of the 10 who received a painted dot, unbeknownst to them, 5 were actually given a clear dot that was not visible to their skin, on their skin. Yet they still felt as if the interviewer was focusing on their dot. Now, from this experiment, we learned that people feel self-conscious about whatever makes them insecure. That insecurity might relate to one's weight, gender, race, or any other distinctive that is viewed as a negative to society. Then he asks, do you ever feel like people are focusing on your red dot? Well, I did. I believed that people were looking for my red dot, staring at it. Now, whether that was accurate or not, it was still affecting my experience. Now, I've learned right here at the Center for Spiritual Living about the power of my thinking. I know about that. I know that what I focus upon is multiplied in my experience, and I've learned how to ask myself, who would I be without that thought? What would my experience be like if I didn't focus on my vulnerability, perceived or real? And you know, this all got me to thinking about, and do I make other people feel self-conscious by what I focus on in them? I mean, when I meet someone and I look at them for the first time, what do I see? Do I see race, or size, gender, sexuality, attractiveness? And what have I been taught about all of these distinctions? Oh, it can be scary to admit that we have prejudices. But generally we do. Now, this book that I mentioned I read while I was away, it tells the story, and I'll tell you more about it in a moment, but it does tell the story about how American society may have a problem admitting its prejudices. And you know, when I'm in denial about something, it makes it very difficult for a healing to take place. Recently, Eckhart Tolle tweeted this: the moment you start watching your thoughts, a higher level of consciousness becomes activated. That's how we can become honest with what's going on inside, by watching our thoughts. Because when we're paying attention to our thoughts, that's when we stop being a victim of our thoughts. Now, don't let that thought slide. Don't let that ugly thought settle in. Interrupt it. Investigate it. Repudiate it. Replace it. Forgive it. So this book I read, it's got a very, very long title. It's great. Here's the title: Everybody Lies, Big Data, New Data, and What the Internet Can Tell Us About Who We Really Are. See, this book, and I'm just devouring it, it's about how internet search engines, you know, like Google search, how it can tell us about our secret thoughts. Oh, you know, the things that we type into the Google search engine. It tells a story of what may be on our mind as a nation. Very, very interesting. And the book suggests that there are some very big red dots that still exist in our society, and they're dots that we have difficulty admitting are there. But in secret, alone with our computers, what we search for tells a very interesting story about us. Maybe not you in particular. It's more like a skeleton that's in the closet, one that we suspected was there, and now it's coming out. You see, people type questions into Google search. You know, Google the Almighty. Google the all-knowing. They type, you know, how do I boil an egg just right? Search. What's the best restaurant in Santa Rosa? Search. And with disturbing frequency, people type in, why are blacks Why are Latinos, why are Jews, why are Asians, why are gays, or whatever group they're focusing on, is this group, and followed by these most common words: rude, stupid, ugly, lazy, evil, cheap, annoying, greedy, dumb. People actually ask Google these questions. It's disturbing. What were they taught before they were 6 or 7 or 8? There are other disturbing trends that show up. One that struck me is that the search for jokes about African Americans, and mind you, they don't use the term African American. Search for jokes about African Americans increase in frequency whenever African Americans are mentioned in the news. This from the book. Among the periods when such searches for jokes about African Americans were highest was the immediate aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, when television and newspapers showed images of desperate black people in New Orleans struggling for their survival. And it says later on in that paragraph, searches for such jokes rise approximately 30% on Martin Luther King Jr. Day in general. You know, to me, being gay is still a big red dot in our world because it's my red dot. And sometimes I'm imagining it, and sometimes it's real. And what I'm learning about America from its search habits is the suggestion that in our United States, racism is an even bigger red dot. In polls, an overwhelmingly majority of black Americans think they suffer from prejudice, and there is ample evidence that they are not imagining it. Yet, our nation, it seems, has difficulty admitting that it is so. It's painful. The author of our book of the month, Gracism, what I get from this is that he's saying that there is an antidote for prejudice. It's called grace. And grace is the unearned, undeserved favor of the divine. See, he takes the word racism and puts a G in the front of it to come up with a new word, gracism, as a reminder that the antidote to prejudice is to embrace the nature of the divine in our thinking, in our behavior, in our language, and in our searches on the internet. And what is the nature of the divine? Well, I learned here at the center that it is to give its life generously and freely to all without prejudice, whether it is deserved or not. That's so beautifully stated in the Bible in Matthew 5. God makes the sun to rise on both those who are good and on those who are bad, and makes the rain to fall both on those who do right and on those who do not. So the question in my heart then is, can I bring that kind of grace into expression in my life? Well, I can see there's room for improvement in my life. I could be more generous with my kindness and my attention, especially for those people I've been taught to fear, for those people I have typically avoided, minimized, judged, complained about, ignored. I could. So I'm thinking of these two ideas this week. Number one, the moment we begin watching our thoughts, that's when something higher becomes available to us, because it's in that moment of watching when I'm paying attention, and that's when I can interrupt what's there, examine what's there, check what's there, forgive what's there. And that's what allows me to step out of whatever prison I've experienced myself being in as a result of what I've been taught. And the second idea is that grace is the extension of favor and love and help, whether it's deserved or not. And when I bring that alive in my life, when I duplicate that in my life, that's when I'm really doing something to help this world be a better place. Did you read the story in the news about the family that got washed out to sea by a dangerous riptide on a beach in Miami, Florida? 2 kids, there were no lifeguards on duty, 8-year-old and 11-year-old, I believe. And the mother saw it happening, and so she swam out to help them, but she got very quickly pulled out by the same tide. So did 2 relatives, as well as there was a total of 10 people stranded in the ocean. And there were people standing there looking, wondering what to do. One woman walking on the beach, she saw all these people looking out into the ocean, and she thought at first, maybe they've spotted a shark. But then she saw what was happening, and she thought to herself, these people are not going to drown today. It's not happening. And so she ran to the closest part, and she started shouting out, form a human chain. And at first, tentatively, 5 people came to her assistance, and then 10, and then 15, and some say up to 100 as they reached out into the water and got to the stranded people, at which point the mother of the children could barely keep her head above the water. She may even have blacked out and later have had a heart incident. But they got to them, and one by one they pulled them and passed them back across the human chain, and an hour later all 10 people were returned to safety. And the mom said afterwards, it was the beachgoers and the grace of God. The grace of God, which is the unearned favor. Why unearned? Because that family did nothing to earn the favor of the people who participated. Do you know some of them that made the human chain couldn't even swim? Now, I'm imagining to myself, if the lady who started the human chain rescue effort first looked into the water and asked herself, are they white? Are those kids gay? They look like Democrats. No. No, you see, there is something for me to pay attention to and notice what this incident has reminded me of, and it's this, that people of different races and genders and politics and abilities can and do come together to help people they know nothing about, and there is something stirringly beautiful and hopeful about that. So I'm remembering this week. That is our nature. We are naturally capable of extraordinary acts of kindness and connection. That's our nature. That's our power. We have the power to look past and beyond our conditioning. We are not stuck. We have the ability to put down whatever we have been conditioned by and grow past it. And most importantly, I'm remembering, it's not me, but it's the grace of God within me that has the power to neutralize prejudice a little more every day. So I invite you to breathe in with me and exhale, letting your eyes close as we shift into an attitude of gratitude. And we acknowledge that one divine life that is everywhere present, showing up in infinite variety, and we are giving thanks for that variety. And by means of this prayer, I am shedding, releasing any thought in me, no matter where it came from, how it was installed, that resists, is afraid of, rejects, or judges differentness. so that I may turn entirely towards the nature of this diverse universe and embrace it for the blessings that it may bring to me, through me into this world as love. Now, I don't know how the world should be, but I do know how to love. And I know that love is of God, and so I trust this love that is in me, that is in us, to guide us and direct us, to inspire and to sustain us. And as I remember this, my true nature, our true nature, I feel as if my life is synchronizing again, harmonizing to what has always been true, that right here, in this moment, is everything that you and I and all people need to know about what is before us to do. And so I shake from me the hypnotism of the group mind, and I emerge with you, free, liberated, refreshed, renewed, and ready to take my place in the community of beings as a beacon of hope and trust and love. Now my heart is filled with gratitude for having prayed this way. And all that remains is for me to release this word into those spiritual laws that respond to us when we do pray. And so with this in mind, I invite you to join me in saying, and so it is. And once again, a breath in, followed by a sigh.